United We Om is a 501c3 nonprofit sharing accessible yoga and meditation with trauma-impacted and under-resourced communities. All of our workshops and trainings are offered by donation with no minimum donation. And your donation directly supports our mission of making the benefits of practice available to everyone. Thanks to supporters like you, we've continued to provide practice virtually throughout the pandemic. Learn more and support our work at unitedweom.org. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the last part in this series, although certainly not the end of our breathing journey, and certainly not the end for our breathing work together. I've found this space so wonderful, and I'm excited to try and find different ways we can all keep unpacking this together. So before we begin, I wanted to have a tactile experience again of why we're in this conversation together and why this is so important. So if you'd like to join me with some Brahmari breath, which we did last week, that's the inhale through the nose and exhale on a kind of a low to medium hum. And we'll just enjoy about 3 of those together in our own time. You can let your gaze be soft or closed. And when you're ready, in through the nose. Whenever you've finished your last hum, you can come back together as a group and just check in about what kind of a shift you created in your thoughts and your experience of this moment in your body from just 3 breaths with a lengthened exhale and the vibration of sound. So this takes us into today's topic, which is breathing for mental health, which really comes down to the idea of balance. And we're going to talk about all the different physicians and pulmonauts that have explored for the last 100 years how breath and creating balance in the breath creates balance in our body and our mind, and is such a powerful tool for all of us, no matter where we are in our lives and our experience of the moment, to come closer into the balance and harmony that is all of our birthright, and that the experience of yoga speaks to. So when we talk about the idea of yoga, in essence, the practices of yoga are all about bringing our whole system into balance. And when we reach that point of balance is when we can feel free. And that could be physical balance, which asana address. And we know that being out of physical balance can lead to disharmony in our breath, because we've talked about all of the muscular systems that support our breath. And then when our breath is out of harmony, then that leads to a lack of harmony in our nervous system, our minds, emotions, and a disconnection and a lack of harmony between ourselves and everything around us. And the way that we're going to unpack this balance and harmony today is by looking at the yogic idea of breathing as a balance between doing, releasing, and being. And when we can foster balance between these three aspects of being alive in this world, it sort of automatically balances some other really important systems in ourselves: oxygen and CO2 in our body, which we'll talk about. And we also know balances our sympathetic nervous system and our parasympathetic nervous system. So, in terms of breathing and what we're going to explore in a little bit, yogic idea of how these three things look in our breath is that the inhale is seen as the doing. The exhale is seen as the letting go, the cessation, the releasing. And those pauses that we've been exploring are seen as the being space. Now, this wisdom, also, if we think about the original way that we were looking at the breath and our mind being like the horse rider and our breath being the horse, we've been exploring how intricately linked horse and rider are. And today's conversation also really has to do with this idea of who is leading, horse and rider, and who is more powerful in freeing ourselves from patterns, horse or rider. So anybody that's ever ridden a horse could probably say without a doubt that who is in charge, right? Like as a rider, we kind of only risk damage to ourselves if we convince ourselves that we are actually in charge. The horse is the powerful being in that connection. And in this way, yoga recognizes that prana and our breath is the powerful leader in this relationship between breath and mind, prana and chitta. And so we turn to the breath as a way of bringing our mind around to states below what we could call a surface state. So in our adult population, more than half of adults, and that's reported, and we all know that most of us don't like to report things that we might feel have a stigma around them, but more than half of adults will experience some form of general anxiety disorder or panic disorder during their lives. And I can tell you that I've been there more than once, so I should count for 3 or 4. And I'm sure a lot of us have also been down that road. What's really interesting about the connection between balance of nervous system and balance of thoughts, which has to do with general anxiety disorder and panic disorder. We can think about generalized anxiety disorder as a lot of chitta, a lot of thinking, thoughts, emotions, fears, and worries about future events. And if we could just simplify this, we could say that it's our body-mind connection kind of run far away from our present moment experience. And we kind of have spoken about how having our nervous system out of balance, being in a mobilization state all the time, that fight or flight mobilized response, can tip us out of balance into constantly convincing our minds there is imminent danger, which ramps up our body. But the other piece that I'd like to explore with you today is the balance between carbon dioxide and oxygen in our body. Last week, we spoke about the central chemoreceptors in our brain that are our body's pH test system, tests our blood for CO2 levels, and based on those CO2 levels, sends the message to our muscular system to either increase our breathing rate or slow down and decrease our breathing rate. What's very interesting about this in terms of mental health is that for at least 100 years, and certainly since the 1960s, researchers have been studying the effects of small doses of CO2 in the treatment of all kinds of disorders, from emphysema and asthma to around World War One, what was called irritable heart syndrome, which was kind of what we've been talking about, a very irregular, incoherent heart and breathing rate, to panic and anxiety and depression, which are all really, really common things that we're working with in our modern culture. And what was discovered is that our oxygen levels don't really change all that much. We've been taught that like more oxygen is better and we should like breathe more and inhale more. But what's super interesting is that in most people who experience emphysema and asthma, but also anxiety, panic, and depression, our CO2 levels in our blood are actually quite low, and we tend to be over breathing. But our body only takes in a certain amount of oxygen. Anything that's extra on top of that gets exhaled again. What's missing in the balance of being able to integrate that oxygen in a way that our body registers, I have enough oxygen, is actually CO2. And so the way that we can begin to harmonize CO2 and oxygen in our body is through breathing slower and breathing less. This was kind of like a big like woo moment for me. So it's really interesting. So how does this look in modern culture for everybody? How does this look in real time in real life? There is a new breathing disorder that has been identified by the National Institute of Health and is being studied widely now, called email apnea. And what it literally looks like is our constant shifting of our attention from one task to another. So we're on the phone and then we get a text and then we're going to email somebody and then we have this thought, we're going to do this other thing. Actually, we know as yogis, that's a lot of vritti. It's a lot of fluctuation in our thoughts. And we know the breath and the thoughts are tied. And so, yeah, Philip's like, oh God, just thinking about it. I know. So when our thoughts are all over the place, so is our breath. And scientists have been studying the fact that in office workers, people commonly, not only is their breath pattern all over the place and they're shallowly breathing and overly breathing, but they have a tendency to totally stop breathing for sometimes up to a minute. And when this happens, it does something very interesting. So in this amazing book that I'm going to link on to this course called Breathe, it's a brand new book, the author, James Nestor, talks about 100 years ago and recently, scientists doing experiments on both animals and people that for one reason or another had damage to their amygdalas. So the amygdalas are the part of our brain that help us be afraid. And in a lot of ways, that's good, especially when we're talking about animals, remembering that predator animals are dangerous, judging fear about walking in front of a car or walking off a cliff. So these are animals and people that stopped experiencing fear altogether for many years. But when inhaling a mix of oxygen and CO2, where the CO2 level was about 35%, which was not enough to change oxygen levels in their body at all. Even people with no access to their amygdala had a panic attack. So this tells us that there's an even more primal fear and thing we're wired to protect ourselves from, even before we talk about our outside environment. And that's a lack of oxygen, right? So we all can recognize that feeling. And we can all sense it now together. I invite you to do this unless you feel like this is going to set something off in you, which is not helpful. In which case, I invite you to not join me in this. If you're curious, you can just take an inhale and then just pause and retain your breath. And at first it feels comfortable. But then as you watch your body's response to it, your mind's response to it, Don't hold it beyond any point that feels like you could exhale and release everything that came along with it. We're wired. Our bodies are like, panic, panic, panic. So this is like twofold how our breathing pattern as modern humans can really be feeding into a feeling of general anxiety, panic, and stress in our lives. Imagine going through every day of our lives, which many of us do without any awareness of our breath. And now we know how easily it is with how distracted our thoughts are, with our shallow breathing pattern and this apnea of holding our breath, certainly feeding into the mental state of all of us. Any questions on that? Yeah, Philip, you can unmute yourself.
I was wondering if you could repeat the CO2 level from that test that you were talking about, like the levels get to a certain point where regardless of other brain function, there's a panic. What was the level?
What's the level of? So the level is different for everybody.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So, and that is the interesting, perfect segue. So, this is why, like we talked about last week, when we first start consciously breathing and lengthening our breath, it can feel for many of us very uncomfortable. Like we've got that gasping thing going on. This gives us information about our central chemoreceptors' tolerance level for CO2, which means that when we get into this habit of over breathing and we're not fully exhaling or having that pause space in our breath, we're not generating as much CO2 in our body, and our chemoreceptors start to lose their tolerance for carbon dioxide in the blood and tell our body to continue breathing like this. So even one slow exhale for some people can set off a feeling, a very uncomfortable feeling. This is why a lot of cases in folks that I've spoken to in our trainings who've experienced trauma, when we talk about the breath, they're across the board express how very much they dislike being asked by a teacher to exhale fully or to breathe on a count that requires them to exhale for a long time. I believe it's that their experience of trauma, right, put their body into hypervigilance and shallow breathing, and then lose their tolerance for CO2 in their body, and then that feels like they're being starved of oxygen, even though their oxygen levels haven't really changed. So what we can do about this is start to increase our tolerance for CO2. Now, this is something that's also practiced by elite athletes. And this is the reason why people in different cultures can train their bodies to free dive for 10 minutes without taking a breath. But when I feel anxiety, a 4-count exhale feels like I'm going to suffocate. There's a lot of flexibility in our body. And so today we're going to talk about the connection between pausing and exhaling and starting to train our bodies to come back to tolerating an appropriate balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide in our body. Remembering that the 5 to 6 breath count per minute is that resonant rate, where our lungs, heart, and brain sync up into coherence. But when we overbreathe and we lose our tolerance for carbon dioxide, that 5 to 6 breath per minute range can feel like we're starved of oxygen. So we're going to kind of walk slowly together, exploring a place where we can start to foster longer, slower exhales and greater pauses. And in yoga, and in our modern culture, we could say that most of us are very comfortable with the inhale. In our culture, most of us are very comfortable with the doing. Most of us are not as comfortable with the letting go and really uncomfortable with being. So a lot of the time our breath rate follows that same pattern. We're really great at inhaling. We really are not taking those being pauses almost at all in our everyday breath, even though, according to yoga, they arise spontaneously. So they are a part of our natural breath rhythm. When we shift to witnessing our breath, we can see them, they're there. And the letting go can also feel really uncomfortable. So we want to start to shift our relationship to those so that they all have equanimity in our mental state and our body. All right. So yes, I think I covered those main important things that I want to talk about with CO2. So a full exhale, we've heard a lot of folks say, or we might have experienced in ourselves. A full exhale leads to a full inhale. Has anybody ever heard that or experienced that? So now we know biologically that's super true. When we take a full deep exhale, it increases carbon dioxide in our blood, and that optimizes oxygen intake into our body. And so then our body's able to say, I have enough oxygen. Whereas if we're over breathing and we're never really fully exhaling, we're handicapping our body's ability to optimize its oxygen intake, which is that negative positive feedback loop. Now, there is a difference between sleep apnea and email apnea, which are really damaging for the body and cause stress and panic, and willfully pausing our breath, living in the being space. And that's a big difference that we want to draw a line towards. And whenever we are in the practice of any kind of existing in the being moment of the breath, the pause, we always want to remind ourselves that we're here in this pause because we choose to be and not because we have to be. And as soon as that pause becomes uncomfortable, or you feel that you're losing your breath, that's actually a sign that you've gone one click too far, and we want to pull back again, because we certainly don't want to allow breath pause to shift over into a place that promotes more anxiety and panic in us. Now, there's one more balance aspect with the breath, which is really important, which is nostril dominance. So a lot of us have practiced alternate nostril breathing, or Nadi Shodhana. What's really interesting is that once again, what the yogis wrote out thousands of years ago is absolutely proved by modern science, which is so cool, only to say that if we just tune into ourselves, we don't need monitors, we don't need all this stuff. We know, the yogis discovered this just by tuning in. So that's a powerful message to take with us. Our nostril dominance shifts every 1 to 2 hours back and forth, right side dominant, left side dominant. And the left nostril is tied to the right brain and is also tied to the parasympathetic nervous system. So breathing with a left nostril dominance triggers the right brain and also parasympathetic response, calming, resting. Right nostril is tied to left brain and sympathetic response. So interestingly, yes, Philip's doing it, but we're all going to do it together now. That's right. Let's all just go into our own laboratory and check in on which nostril is dominant now. So all we need to do is close one. I'm going to close my right. And I'm just going to enjoy 1 or 2 breaths through my left nostril. Then I'm going to close my left. Oh, there it is for me. Raise your hand if your left nostril is dominant right now. Raise your hand if your right nostril, yes, right nostril is dominant right now. Very interesting. So we know that throughout our day, if one nostril is dominant, then that aspect of our parasympathetic nervous system is going to be at the forefront. And the yogis figured out that really what we want to cultivate is balance between the two. So we're not going to practice Nadi Shodhana, alternate nostril breathing today, but we are going to explore how to balance our nostril dominance. So the yogis, they used to use a staff or a danda, which is a word we know a lot from yoga asanas, with a big round top, and they would compress it into the armpit, the arm cave of the non-dominant side. Also, the pose Yoga Dandasana, which I'm sure I couldn't do anymore, but which is when you take your heel and you actually like push it into your armpit. This is also the purpose for that asana. We're going to use our hand, and you could also use a tennis ball if you wanted. So whichever side was dominant, so my left side was dominant, I'm going to make a fist with my left hand. If your right side was dominant, you'll do it with your right hand. And I'm going to place my fist into the armpit of my non-dominant side. And I'm going to squeeze gently my non-dominant arm down. So I feel my fist kind of up into that cave. And this could take a couple breaths, a couple minutes. So just as a way to have it in our toolkit, let's all just take a few breaths. Focusing our attention on the breath moving in and out of the non-dominant nostril. Awesome. I feel like I could probably stay here for 3 more minutes to really balance things out. We won't today. You can release that. And then if you want, you could just check it out and see if anything shifted. Pretty cool. So in your life, even if you're feeling kind of off kilter, it's an interesting thing to check in and see where your nostril dominance is. And then there's a neat trick you can bring in to bring yourself back into balance. At another time, we'll talk about using breathing through just one or the other nostril to kind of change your nervous system response in terms of breathing through the left side would be great for sleeping, resting, digesting your food. Breathing through the right side would be great to wake up, energize, great before like an energetic physical practice. But remembering that balance is the thing. Balance is always what we're seeking at the very core. All right, are we ready to move on? Any questions before we move a little and breathe a little? Oh yeah, Heather, go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
I was wondering if you could maybe explain why the armpit changes your breathing. I don't know if you could just for a minute speak to that.
So I have some theories. I won't say that I know 100%. Here's my experience, because I learned it recently too. So I'm also interested in learning more. My theory is from playing around with this for the last 2 weeks or so, that I think it has to do a lot with the lymph system and lymph drainage as well. Because when I do this in my non-dominant side, I don't know if anybody else felt this, but I can actually feel drainage down that side of my body. And that's also like for sinuses and things of that. Like there's a lot of yogic practices about like moving the lymph around, and that to decrease pressure in the face, tapping here kind of like opens that gate. So I'm sure there are a lot of reasons, but I'm going to say that that's probably one of them that I can speak to. Let's learn more about it though. So fun, right? Anybody else? Philip, go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
Hi there. Okay. So I got some like serious knuckles. So like this is very awkward. Like how exactly are you holding it? And also I learned to make a fist in Taekwondo. So like I've got like a lump here. Am I supposed to be relaxed with the hand? You know what I mean? Like I'm not punching anything.
It's a really
That's kind of, it's funny because like I'm like, well, you know, how do I know it's not supposed to be rigid? Like, except that nothing in yoga usually is.
yeah. So I think what's interesting is that this is kind of like an adaptation of other things, like using our heel or like an actual staff that's meant for this. So you might find a tennis ball actually more comfortable just because of that. But the other thing is like I've played around with like moving my fist in different directions. And instead of squeezing, maybe if there's a lot of sensitivity, maybe it's more just like allowing and just like really gently allowing gravity. So I'd play around with it. But yeah, a tennis ball might be your jam in the end. Awesome. Okay. So if we're great here, great. Then we're going to move around a little bit to get our bodies ready. We'll do some different shapes than we did last week. And before we head back there, I'll just offer the resistance breathing that we did last week during the shape. So if we remember, we were breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth. And we can also do that with our mouth closed, with a little hug at our vocal cords. And if we want, we can keep that hug as we inhale the nose as well, so that it sounds like the inside of a seashell. If that creates tension, just let it go. So I'm going to head back here. Oh, feels good. And if you're just sitting for today, again, you can be really creative about the same kind of muscle groups or shapes, coming up with something for where you are. So for today, we're going to look about centering the femur heads in our pelvis and opening up this space of the front hips, which tends to get really contracted with all of the sitting that we do. So I'm going to come around onto a table. Not onto a table. I'm going to be a table. And then I'm going to let my right foot come forward. And then I'm going to inch my left knee back. I think a lot of the time we talked last week about with physical shapes when we're tuning into our breath, kind of resisting the temptation to go all the way to our physical edge where we tend to not be able to allow the breath to flow and to watch the breath. So I'm going to hang here. And if this is not comfortable with your hands on the floor, you could bring your hands up or your arms up onto your front knee, or you could have blocks or a chair. And instead of lifting up with my torso, I'm going to find a little balance between my tailbone and my lower belly muscles. So as I breathe out, I'm going to feel that my tailbone is reaching towards my left heel. And at the same time, I'm going to feel that the space below my navel is gently sinking back, almost seeking a midpoint where tailbone and low belly might energetically meet in that heart axis, that central channel of our body. I'm just going to explore that for another moment. I also invite you to move your head, yes, yes, looking for the balance of the skull on its axis. And we'll also use this as an opportunity to just get to know where our everyday breath is today. I'm going to shift myself back. I'm going to bring my right knee back beside my left knee, and I'm just going to rock a little bit side to side. You could circle, you can move the spine any way that feels good, and then I'll bring my left foot forward full disclosure, in my own practice, I enjoy staying in these shapes a really long time, so this feels very fast to me. But just for the interest of time, we'll just get the most of them. And now this time, as I exhale, I feel my tailbone lengthen towards my right heel, and the space below my navel kind of melt back towards my tailbone, getting a little longer and lighter through my spine. And moving the head. Again, you're welcome to be using resistance breathing here, either on the exhale only or on the inhale and the exhale. Speaking of balance, my whole right side is much tighter than my left. If you find that for yourself, I encourage you to attend to it in your practice. There's no reason to hold or to be in shapes for the exact same amount of time, one side to another. If one side has some more physical samskaras, you should definitely stay longer there. And I'm gonna pull myself back, and again, any movement that feels good. Amazing. So if you're on the floor, you want to play on the floor, I'm going to just do a really gentle twist. If you're in your chair, you could definitely twist in your chair by just turning your torso in the same directions. So I'm going to come down onto my back. And I'm a huge fan of shifting the hips before I lower the knees. So I'm going to shift my hips about 2 to 3 inches to the right. And then so the first thing you could do is let your knees head over to the side without stacking or changing at all. And reaching a little energy slightly more down through the right knee. Or you can bring the right knee over on top of the left knee. So if you find that this lifts your right shoulder off of the floor, instead of trying to jam your right shoulder down, see if you can instead reach your left arm up towards the ceiling and broaden the left scapula away from the spine. So you're creating more space along the back body. And you can create a little more balance by letting the left shoulder, when you relax your left arm down again, lift up away from the floor slightly in order to allow the right shoulder to become a little heavier. And as we allow our breath to flow, we're creating space and ease in the obliques and space and ease in the intercostal muscles. You can practice a little space, breathing, and send your breath into the right lung and emptying the right lung. And then very slowly you can return to center in your chair or on the floor. You want to find balance again in the hip shoulder alignment, and then shifting hips slightly over to the left. You can let the knees come down just as they are. You can slide the left knee on top of the right knee. If you feel that left shoulder is very light, again, you can explore broadening the right scapula away from the spine. And as you let the right arm relax down, pressing ever so slightly into the right scapula, the right shoulder is a little lighter, allowing the left shoulder to become a little heavier. Sending and noticing your breath in the left lung. And returning slowly back to center. So for this last shape, I'm going to grab my folded blanket. This is a really delicious variation on bridge pose, which we tend to do in a very yang or very muscular, active way. This bridge pose is super sweet, and it teaches the balance between tailbone and heart that we're going to explore in our breathing next. So I'm going to have my long folded blanket here. I'm going to walk my seat back so that my pelvis is actually on the blanket. And then I'm going to walk myself down until only the very top of my scapula are supported by the blanket. So I'm going to feel that opening in the upper ribs and the clavicles. The back of my head resting. I can do my yes slightly. Yes. And then once again, I'm going to reach my left arm up and broaden my back. Reach my right arm up, broaden my back. And you can let the arms rest beside you or on your body, or you can take a hold of opposite elbows. And being mindful of our low ribs tendency to want to poke out and do all the doing for us. As you let the elbows relax towards the space over your head, anytime you feel your low ribs have kind of shifted far out, snuggle them in a little bit, and then take a moment so you can experience the softening feeling that it's coming more from the space around the caves of your arms, your armpits. And if you like, you can extend your legs here, but keep the legs active, flexing the toes, reaching through the heels and snuggling the low ribs down, softening them in. And now as you inhale and exhale, become aware of the tailbone, energetically lengthening down towards the heels. And the heart space, energetically lightening and lifting. See if you can imagine that balance between lengthening downward through the tailbone and becoming light and lifted through the heart creates a sort of container in your abdomen. The energy of that extends down the legs through the heels and up the central channel out through the crown of the head. And then very slowly letting your arms relax down if they were above you. Bending your knees, bringing your feet to the floor if they were extended. We'll roll off of our support. And now here's your moment to choose if you'd like to enjoy your breathing reclining on your back today, or if you'd like to bring yourself up to sit. If you bring yourself up to sit, just remembering that having the seat slightly elevated above the knees kind of helps to free the sacrum and the natural curves of our spine. And I'm going to come sit close to you so I'm easier to hear. All right. Settling in. Addressing our gaze as we're ready, eyes soft or eyes closed or shifting between the two. Finding our moment to scan our bodies. We've been practicing it each week. Checking in from the feet, slowly up the body on your own time until you reach your head. Just acknowledging any last pockets of tension. And then just taking notice of the 4 qualities of the breath each time we come to practice. Getting to know our horse today. The length of the inhale and exhale ratio today. Just noticing what it is. The texture of the breath today. The inhale and the exhale. Quality of space. Where is the breath filling into and flowing out from? And the quality of rest, that pause of pure being at the peak of the inhale and the peak of the exhale without forcing, just noticing. And then I'm going to move into a practice called Viloma Pranayama, or against the grain breathing. And although this is usually practiced and called 3-part yogic breath, this against the grain can be adapted to any ratio or approach, just like all the other breath explorations. So instead of telling our horse where to go today in the spirit of letting the horse be a leader, we're going to allow our against the grain breath to flow as we witness where the breath flows into instead of directing the breath into particular places. And the way that it will feel, the practice for today will be a practice of space, the quality of space and time. So as we feel our next inhale rising, we're going to let the inhale fill into our body until we start to feel a little tension. And then we're going to pause and relax. And then we'll allow more inhale to flow in till we feel tension, and then we'll pause and relax. That might be it. If there's room for a little more inhale, feel free. So it could be a 2-part inhale or 3. And then slowly, smoothly, and softly exhale. Exhale until you feel that you've exhaled completely, and then just experience the pause before you let the breath flow in. Feel tension, pause, soften. Allow more breath to flow in. That might be it, or maybe there's more. It could even be a 4-part inhale. Acknowledge the pause of being at the top, and then slowly, smoothly exhale completely. The pause of being at the bottom. Exploring this on your own, so we're acknowledging quality of space. So where in our body is our breath flowing into and out of? Technically, anatomically, the breath flows into the upper lungs first and then fills down to the lower lungs, empties from the upper lungs first and then the lower lungs last. But considering that most of us tend towards overbreathing, breathing into the upper lungs, I think a great image is to imagine the breath filling low first and then filling the spaces of middle and upper, and emptying upper first and then middle and lower. Imagine that you, a rider, are on this beautiful instinctual horse. And notice how every inhale is a wonder of a slightly different breath. Now, when we complete our next slow, full exhale, we'll free our breath to flow in and out on its own, meaning full surrender, fullest surrender possible, witnessing the body breathing us. And acknowledge any shifts in the quality of our thoughts or experience of being in this moment. Now we're going to shift. Now that we've explored what our relationship to our lung capacity can be today, into the uneven ratio breathing, where we lengthen our exhale. And we'll add a visual, which the yogis called end of 12th, which is a place 12 fingers or 1 foot out in front of our hearts. And so you can imagine a spot there. It's as that being the space that we're breathing in from and out to. And we'll add our quality of time. So as you breathe in, imagining the breath flowing in from that spot, end of 12th, parallel to the heart. And then allowing our exhale to work its way to being 2 counts of exhale to every 1 count of inhale. And as you breathe out, feeling the connection of the exhale flowing out to that end of 12th point. Pause of being at the bottom of the exhale. And now each time we inhale, let's add an element of anchoring the inhale by feeling our tailbone become a little bit heavier towards the earth, towards the ground, or towards our heels. And as we exhale, let's add the balance of feeling our heart continue to connect and lift to that end of 12th spot. Remembering the hollow of the throat, softening instead of hardening. Softening in the face, jaw, and tongue. Now, if this is wonderful for you today, please stay with this for this last moment or two. For those of you that find that your CO2 comfortability is okay here, we don't feel gaspy at 1 inhale to 2 exhale count. We'll just play around with a breathing pattern made famous by Dr. Andrew Weil. And this really speaks to the idea of pausing the breath and lengthening the breath as really increasing our ability to tolerate CO2. So this breath, which we'll explore a few times, is an inhale on a count of 4. A pause for 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and exhale on 8, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale on 4, 2, 3, 4. A pause on 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and exhale for 8, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Exploring this 2 or 3 more times if it's comfortable. And witnessing and acknowledging anything that rises for you around pausing the breath or slowing the exhale. Remembering that you have plenty of oxygen in your blood. Just becoming aware of the relationship between the letting go and the being aspect of your breathing. This is a supremely relaxing breath, wonderful before sleep or any time that you feel that you need to come forward with your soothing nervous system. And the next time you've completed an exhale on your 8 count, can let go of that doing. And again, witness your breath. Step back and allow the breath to flow in and out. Witness the quality of the thoughts in your mind. Witness the experience of your physical body. And always wondering who is the one who is breathing. Allowing the horse to lead. And then slowly bringing some movement into your body. If your eyes are soft or closed, you can allow them to take in the room around you. If you're supremely in a space where you feel like, I'm actually going to stay here for a little while, feel no need to come on up for me or for us. You can stay just as you are. So in our last minute, I will say there will certainly be more space for this breathing work together. So we don't have to say goodbye to this together now. Moving forward, 10 minutes a day, I think, is a really good goal of practicing being with your prana. And the morning tends to be a really good time, but I would also add that the evening is an excellent time, especially to practice some of these lengthening exhale, lengthening pause breathing practices. And every time you find yourself ready to breathe, there's always a little bit of time to remember Doing your body map, just finding where you are in space, helps cultivate that witness that we need. And then noticing our everyday breath, the 4 qualities of the breath first. And then choosing your medicine. And there's so much here. And so, you can really feel free to like go on a sadhana and really have a practice of practicing a particular medicine based on what you learn about your nostril dominance and your everyday breathing at that point. Then always remember to set the darn thing free at the end. So don't manipulate your breath and then be like, good, that's it, I'm done. Always remember that a yama in the end is, free from restraint. That's where we're headed. Truly spontaneous, truly natural, truly wild. So always set the breath free and spend just a little time in Shavasana to just acknowledge all the pieces as they weave together. That's where we get glimpses of that feeling of balance and immersion. That is yoga. All right, thank you so much, everybody, for being on this fabulous ride with me these last few weeks. I really look forward to sharing more space together again in the future.